British, French, Syrian and Lebanese authorities set up an organization called OCP, Organisation Céréale Pénifiable, to collect the surplus grain from the peasants and deliver it to the cities. About 30 British officers were borrowed from base for this job. Most of them knew nothing about grain, yet they had to fix the quota that each village had to supply and see it was brought to the collection centers. They had to buy sometimes as much as 200 tons a day from very shrewd peasants. Landlords and chiefs who tried to take advantage of the scarcity had to be told, sometimes instructed, that we would not tolerate profiteering. Captain Angus Hume, behind the desk, would tell you something about the job.
Well, there you see me. I was a surveyor in peacetime at Surbiton. I found myself suddenly popped down in Hammer in northern Syria. That's the place where the water wheels creak and groan and moan all day and night. It was a lonely job in strange country with 500 villages to look after. But I knew that I had to win people's confidence. I drove hundreds of miles from village to village, arranging quotas, checking up, watching, and learning and meeting people. Well, at first, I was hardly what you call welcome. I was so green I shuddered to think of it. I remember one day arriving at a village. I noticed some camels and sacks of grain lying on the ground. Well, they weren't allowed to move grain without a permit. So I decided I'd talk to the head man of the village, and I was taken to see him. And we had the usual hospitality of the country and ended up with coffees, and we talked, and he explained that, no, he hadn't got a movement order, but that his head man was in the collecting center right at this moment asking for one. And of course they wouldn't move the grain without permit. Well, after some more coffee and handshakes, I left. I left quite satisfied. But looking back on it now, I know exactly what happened that night when I was gone. I know the camels were harnessed, and the grain was loaded, and up in the moonlight went the grain to the hills. It wasn't that they were too clever for me, but that I didn't understand the way their minds worked. But gradually, after some months, I did begin to understand. I understood how they thought, I understood their customs, and they got to know me too. I remember once being told that if I went to speak with a certain man in a certain village, he'd tell me where some grain was hidden. But I went to see him. At first he protested that he knew nothing about it. Allah would confirm that he knew nothing about it. Nobody hid grain in his village. But I saw that he was acting, and I persisted. I was learning. No, he knew nothing about grain, but just a moment. Perhaps he had a friend who might know something about it. And this was the friend. Well, I carried on the game, and I spoke to the donkey because I'd noticed a sack of grain placed beside him rather too ostentatiously. Yes, I was right. That donkey had been that way before, carrying grain. It was a great joke. So I followed him, and the whole village followed. And he headed for a courtyard. Well, of course, when the householder resisted with his meat axe, I knew that he'd hoarded the grain somewhere, and we searched the yard, and there in a corner, under some firewood, was the grain. And we did win their confidence. When they found that we didn't steal their grain, that the scheme was operated for Syria's own benefit, they cooperated. And the grain flowed into the 6 main collecting centers.